Afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good, oh, good, oh, good. My name is Pandeani Liphosa. Welcome to the Gqom Soundscapes workshop. I'm running it here with my colleague Siwe Ntombela. We thought we'd start the workshop by playing a song by a DJ we went to visit when we were at Mlazi last year, DJ Lucy Man. The name of the song is Emakoneni. I hope everyone can hear me well. Huda, I'm just going to go straight for it, eh? Yeah.
Sure, I can read out your bios if you want me to, or we can just go into it.
Yeah, okay. Maybe by way of intro, then just orientate people.
Okay, so keep it. We'll start off with formal. So just firstly, thank you so much, Pandeani and Siwe, for agreeing to do this workshop. It's really great to have you as part of this series. So I see a few names that I don't know, so maybe I'll very briefly say what this is about. So I run History and Theory. I'm the program convener at the GSA. And as part of the master's year, there isn't any formal coursework for History and Theory. The official course happens in the honors year. But following a really interesting and successful and engaging session with honors students last year, I decided with some prompts to extend this into a series of workshops and seminars this year. So these are optional sessions, and for these workshops, each session I've invited a different practitioner or researcher, architects. I think most of the people invited see themselves quite broad in different ways and move between different fields to talk about their research and to think together about how we might think about drawing research, practice-based research, and just different forms of understanding the built environment and the world around us beyond the strictures of architecture as a discipline. So today we have the two presenters are Siwe Ntombela, who is a researcher in the Built Environment Program at the South African Cities Network. Her interests lie in creatively activating community voices in ways that fundamentally drive co-productive spaces. Her current work at SACN involves facilitating the visualisation studio across South Africa's major cities, bringing together multidisciplinary urban actors for the development of future city visuals that reflect how spatial transformation could actualise itself. And the second, Pande, who is no stranger to the GSA as he's been involved in different units. He's passionate about design-driven processes. He's a Johannesburg-based architect and creative thinker whose work revolves around analysing how post-colonial cities help shape new ideas of community. He's currently working as a senior architect at Library Special Projects, LSP, and he's primarily involved with work that explores how aggregated forms of memory making can help marginalised groups orientate themselves within the present. So welcome to both of you and to everyone who's joined, and I'll hand over to you. Looking forward to this.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're excited and very nervous about this first Zoom workshop ever, so please go easy on us. Yeah, we're going to try and make this as informal and as fun as possible. And we're going to try and split the workshop into three. The first is us just presenting the work we've been doing in relation to Gqom and analysing. And then the second part is we're going to ask you, the participants, to just sort of formulate yourselves into groups and come up with a list of some songs and sound infrastructures and so on. And then the third part is just asking everyone to make some drawings. So I'll start by maybe just breaking down the work we've been doing over the past year, and then Siwe will just jump in. So last year, 2019, a group of postgraduate Wits students decided to take some students to Mlazi, Durban, to collaborate and coordinate in some kind of design exchange with students from UKZN, Mangosuthu University, and DUT, Durban University of Technology. And our purpose was really to go down there and see how this Gqom sort of youth culture So our passion really is about youth culture and how youth culture in all kinds of urban spaces sort of specializes itself. So we went to Umlazi, and obviously Gqom is like the kind of predominant youth culture there that we now were interested in interrogating. And I think we went there with really like two sort of sets of questions to look at when we got there. The first one was, we kind of sort of said to ourselves that in any kind of urban environment, on a sort of street sidewalk, the noise and chaos that one experiences as an outsider especially makes no sense. You know? And we use music as a way to make the sort of urban sonic chaos legible, you know? So we kind of use music to make sense out of the city. And that was our intention with going to Durban. You know? How do we use Gqom to read this township, to make sense out of it? So we're obviously saying, yes, that music is territorial. And what is it that's unique about Umlazi that produces this kind of sound? And then obviously, how does this culture sort of contribute to the urban knowledge of this area? That was the first sort of little theory thing that we had in our pocket. The second one was, how do we use drawing to interrogate the world of sound? You know, so Gqom is obviously like a kind of sound-based culture, and we're architects and urban designers and planners. And the way we communicate visually is according to a very strict set of rules. You know, so how do we then use those rules to interrogate whatever kind of rules that Gqom has to sort of spatialize itself and to, you know, to do its thing? So we went there to really try and investigate what is Gqom, what are its rules, and how it spatializes itself, and so on and so forth. And that's really basically it. So what I'll do now is just maybe show a set of slides. There's no particular order. Siwe is just going to break down the whole process of us being there, the kinds of people we spoke to, and so on and so forth. And then we'll just open it up to questions, and I hope there will be questions. And then we'll get into all kinds of little activities. Okay, cool. SI, I think you're on mute there.
Yeah, I just unmuted. Thanks, PH. Maybe just as a way of starting is to say that I am from Umlazi, which is what made it easier for the group to sort of come here to Durban to investigate this culture that I didn't really see at first how we could start investigating it from you know, an urban perspective in terms of you know, our teachings and the way that we look at and interpret urban space. But maybe it's just to say that so generally, I feel like Umlazi isn't as well documented a township as other townships across South Africa. So a lot of the history and the teachings and the development in terms of the urban space of Umlazi is not well documented. So we had to find like an old man who was like a vessel or portal into the past, really, who could tell us really what this space, you know, the history of Umlazi and how it's developed into what it is now. And so that's really what we did on the first day, which is to glean into the past and see how that's influenced the present in terms of the spaces that currently exist in Umlazi and the people's relationship to different spaces. So I'm just gonna quickly share with you guys just a route that we took that really tried to orientate people in terms of Umlazi. So and the part that's Umlazi E there at the top is where the school is located, and we really took a journey around, well, the main sort of traffic areas around Umlazi, which are a lot of the traffic routes that also carry a lot of the taxis, so as the main routes around Umlazi. So we took that as a journey just for people to get familiarized with the space, and also to try and understand the different urban forms and the sights and sounds, the different perspectives that you can glean from looking into the area. And really what this allowed us to see was the different typologies and the different spaces and people. So that was really what the first day was about, is to get orientated with the space. I'm going to try and show you guys also one of the most, iconic sort of spaces that house or celebrate youth culture rather in Umlazi, and it's really it's these two spaces here. So this is Max's Lifestyle, and really just like a few meters away from it is AHT. So these are some of the really prominent spaces that allow people to come together and listen to and enjoy the music, but also it's interesting to see some of the differences in the spaces, to say that this type of space here, Max's Lifestyle, is more, how can I put it? It's more of so there's a lot of different perspectives and different types of Gqom that we are aware of. There's more of the, the dirty, the rough, the unfiltered type of Gqom. And then you get sort of the more palatable type of stuff that can be commercialized and played on, radio stations and that type of stuff. So there's already also those types of, perceptions and ideas, and people associate different spaces to that, type of sound. So it's really was more about, those types of investigations and trying to associate different spaces with different sounds and people, and the way different people dress when they go into these spaces. So then we were really trying to identify, okay, what is the location of this sound? Something that we, the second day that we termed Konintekalai, which is something is ringing, so there's a sound. So we're trying to locate exactly where does this sound come from. So which was our encounter with DJ Luciman, and we went to his place, Gqom Mlazi. So he really showed us his whole setup of where he's producing his music. And as we arrived, he had actually just completed making a song, on that day, which was really great. So this was really his studio setup, and he allowed us to come inside and see, how he produces the sound. So we proceeded obviously to ask him some questions and interrogate, what is the process of him getting the sound out? So trying to now understand how the sound moves and how it gets to the people that are, his fans, his peers, and how he tries to, earn an income from this music. And really it was to understand some of the frustrations that he has, in terms of the music and getting access to certain spaces and people. There's a lot of connections that are required, So this is his backroom that's on the plot of the main house where he produces the music. And really what some of the things that are starting to come through is different people's access to networks and how that influences their access to this type of economy. Gender, what are the life chances of a woman being able to have a back room where it's usually given to the son in the family to have his own space in the yard. So it's also about how now how to use the taxis that carry the sound. I remember when I was still a lot younger and, making choices when you're trying to catch a taxi. You want to get onto the taxi that has, the loudest, sound, the best song, the newest song. So it's also how we associate this infrastructure to the type of decisions and choices that we make in the way that we move around the space. So on the last day really of the exchange and the generation of these maps and visuals, and us translating what we'd heard and felt, and the discussions that had come about, was we were graced by the presence of DJ Touch of Soul, who's a renowned Gqom DJ that plays as a resident DJ AHT, and he was able to, you know, give us his story and the background. He was really curious about how we were able to relate, you know, planning and architecture to, you know, Gqom and, you know, this culture that he's so, you know, well versed with, and he's himself an actual student of housing. So it was really great to see how these, you know, everything, obviously it happens in space, and our curiosity really lies in trying to understand how we can map music as a form of memory. And because we know that Black culture is not really as well documented, even more in township spaces. So it's really just, this work is still in progress. It's really still incomplete, but there's lots of iterations and additions made to it from different points of inquiry and different things that we are still curious about, and us pulling the work in different directions. So we were able to really present to each other about how, you know, the different influences of the physical and, you know, urban, the topography of Umlazi, for example, how it's made up, the different hills in the township, how they are able to sort of reflect and bounce music off, and, you know, make the impact a lot louder and able to reach a further distance. So it's really interesting to see how the different, you know, the urban form has allowed this culture to spread and to be celebrated and to be heard by different people in a lot of spaces. So yeah, I don't want to go on too long. There's a lot I can say about this, but I think that really just trying to sum up what we went through and the different types of things that we, you know, noticed and were able to sort of reflect in the different outputs that we created.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on there, Siwe, you know, I think one of the biggest things we kind of tried our best to unpack was like what kinds of infrastructures enable this music to grow, to move, and also just to like move from being like within a sort of virtual space, because a lot of the ways that people get their music distributed obviously is on the internet. But then how does that move from then being on the internet to being into very like sort of physical spaces? And what are the politics between these very different physical spaces, you know, within the township? And there was a whole science, you know, involved behind it. And Siwe also touched on the fact that, you know, this DJ we went to go visit is a guy. His name is Luciman, very nice guy. But there's there's obviously politics behind the fact that it's only boys that really are given a back room, you know. And as a woman, there's not a lot of space for women to sort of practice or participate within this culture, you know. And a lot of like red flags were raised by students there, you know, which was obviously very interesting. And yeah, I mean, we like Siwe was saying, you know, go on with this for days, but I think that sums up the Umlazi thing. And I think just to also maybe stress that our interest here is really also just youth culture. So we're not obsessed with Gqom, you know. I think for us, we're just sort of interested in how youngsters within these urban environments find very creative ways to, you know, I don't know, obviously keep themselves busy, participate within our culture, and sometimes even put food on their plates. I mean, put food on the tables. You know what I mean? So I think we were now obviously trying to package that in a way that speaks to how this township sort of grows in a very kind of urban way, and that's it. That was Umlazi 2019, and we would like to open it up to questions. So we're hoping that everyone has kind of gotten the gist of what we're doing, maybe, and yeah, let's see if there's any questions, and if not, we'll just jump into the next phase of the workshop. Hey, Jack, how you doing, man?
All right, how are you?
Good, man. Good.
Yeah, thank you both Siwe and Pandeani for the wonderful presentation. I think not so much a question, but rather a few comments on things that I found interesting. I think the first one, the absence of history in a lot of townships and African spaces. I think that was interesting, but specifically, I think Siwe mentioned about Umlazi, which is a space that has not been documented as much as other townships in South Africa. And I think I found it really interesting how you used the old man as a portal into the past. I'd have loved to hear a bit more about that. What were the challenges maybe, and how effective was that as a method versus bias and issues like that? I don't know how you dealt with that in terms of your research. But also I think it's quite interesting how Siwe mentioned about music being a carrier of this culture, being a carrier of history, of culture, of a space, and how it begins to sort of build the culture itself. So I feel like it's quite interesting from the discussion how it doesn't just carry the culture, just doesn't just speak about history, but how it builds it in that space, and how it translates the lifestyle of the people in a different medium. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting, the work that you're doing. So yeah.
Hey, thanks, Jack, man. I mean, maybe just to speak about Ubaba that came to speak to us that day, and SI, I think will elaborate there. But I think what I found interesting about the way he approached what we were looking at was that for him, there wasn't anything new about Gqom and youth culture, you know. He kind of saw history repeating itself, you know. And you know, I mean, I think youngsters always find ways to express themselves, and for him, I guess he was sort of maybe just going into the history of Umlazi and apartheid, you know, and the contrast between then and now. So that shift was a big light bulb moment, I guess. It kind of orientated us into the history of the space. And then I guess our challenge obviously is now to sort of create links, find traces of how that history still sort of permeates itself within the hood there. But Esai, I'm sure you can elaborate there.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, PH. But maybe just to add on that is to say that the whole point really was for us to reuse what we know best, right? As an African culture, oral history is a big thing that I think has been lost really through the way that technology has sort of consumed us and the way that we document things now. So having that person who has lived that past really, and obviously Umlazi as a township that was created under apartheid has a lot of, you know, trauma attached to it, and a lot of things that really can be celebrated about the youth culture that was able to emerge under those circumstances. So it was also really trying to revive really that way of us documenting our history, is to listen and to speak to each other and relate in that way. But also, you know, in the way that, I mean, we're also just trying to test different ways of doing things. And sometimes there's some, you know, really cool things that emerge, like you'll see even in the types of words or the language that he uses. He was speaking about elate hour, which is, you know, in apartheid where there were curfews in the inner city that you had to, you know, be home by that time. And how Gqom and this nightlife culture is a direct, like, disregard for that type of, you know, life and those types of rules, was really interesting for us to start drawing on those things. So it's more, we're able to glean some of the similar rebellion type of youth culture or behaviors that were similar then and now, but also to draw insights of how these different spaces that we see now, Mlazi, came about. You know, the people building their own houses and the government tearing them down the very next day, but they build them and rebuild time and time again. So it's that resistance that's it's sort of been ingrained in the way of life in Umlazi. You know, people always trying new things and testing new ways, and there's different types of connections that people make when things work or don't work. So it's really interesting to see the types of behaviors that we can relate from the past and now, and how those types of things are similar and what we can learn from them.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack. Any more questions?
No. I'm just noting down a few things that were interesting from what you were talking about.
There's a question from Deborah. Deborah, do you want to speak it? She's put it in the chat box.
Oh, hi. I'm not sure, because I just got in a bit late, because I know you guys spoke about what you guys are going to do in the program. But I'm very interested to see how you guys graphically represented the music in which you guys heard. You know, the thing you said, where does the music come from? I wanted to see how you guys graphically came to that conclusion, in inverted commas conclusion. I don't know if you're going to get to the point where we get to see that.
Sure.
Hi, Deborah, yeah. Let me just share my screen here real quick. So, Deborah, you know, I mean, obviously now trying to like find a relationship between how drawing can interrogate the sonic, you know, is quite challenging, especially because, you know, as architects, you know, there are very stringent rules about how we practice drawing, even if it's like a site analysis and you almost have to just sketch the area. You know, you almost have a very limited view, or you draw what you see, you know. But when it comes to like this music thing, you know, your ears almost see in all directions, you know what I mean? And for us, that's interesting, you know. So then how do you turn that into a drawing? You know, how do you like package something that is experienced as almost like a full body thing, you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's like 360 vibe. So what we sort of encourage the students to do is, you know, to kind of break the rules or resist against the rules of architecture, you know, and not just use the conventional ways of drawing what they see, but, you know, how do you then also write what you hear, you know? And it's almost, you know, trying to ask students to do what you guys are going to be doing a bit later, to like be a bit performative about it, you know, improvise a little bit. you know, and write what you hear, whatever lyrics you sort of see that influence you or you feel are important, put them there. And then just package it. Like what you're seeing here doesn't really make sense. If you kind of presented this in a first year architecture thing, you know, you'd have to like really defend it. But I think what we're trying to do, obviously, you know, is trying to find new ways of interrogating space, you know, and space in places that I think what we do as architects struggles to make sense. How do I put this? I think the ways in which we learn architecture, you know, struggles to make sense out of spaces like Umlazi, you know, and I think this is our act. We haven't really perfected it, you know, we're just trying to find new ways, you know, and ways I think that speak to us. And yeah, so I mean, there's no answer, but I guess I think I'm trying to make sense out of it. So we are trying to make sense out of it. Essa, do you have any comments there?
I think, okay, I'm not sure if Pande is showing all the images, but there were some maps. I think the way that we try to sort of segment the way we document what we found was to, so this thing in terms of like soundscapes, really trying to understand where the sound travels and the main sort of routes, the main traffic routes, the taxi routes, is really where, you know, the sound is really the most concentrated, because there's a lot of now economic activity and just general like high streets. So it's really just trying to document those types of things in the culture. And I think it's not necessarily only in translating it into graphics like sketches and maps, but also diagrams, and words, symbols, and signs that also can allow us to understand better and translate what we're hearing into a visual format. So just like that, the diagram that Upande is showing now, really trying to understand the connections and linkages and the overlaps in the way that the infrastructure of Gqom is set up. So we didn't really try to restrict ourselves in terms of you know, the way that we are taught to understand or interrogate space, but to, you know, open it up, because this is a different kind of space that we aren't ordinarily required to, you know, learn about or investigate in our teachings.
Is there anything specific to Gqom that attracted you to the genre in particular? Or are there things specific to Gqom that enable specific working methodologies that another style of music, also in Umlazi, may not have allowed? I'm just thinking about how temporal music is and how quickly genres can come and go. Perhaps there's also a conversation to be had about the transience of music and its impact on something as permanent as space. Just thinking out loud. And this is coming from Nare Mokhoto. Nare, so I think, and I don't know if this is the Nare I know. So for us, like we've said previously, our interest really is on youth culture, and we're just trying to find like lenses through which to sort of analyze the present. You know what I mean? And to look at history. You know, and we're using youth culture as a way to sort of understand taxi ranks, understand you know, trading systems, to understand urban economies and so on. And I think the more specific the way in which we sort of try and understand these spaces, the better. And we've used Gqom, really. I mean, we could have used anything. And I think for us it's exciting because youth culture is exciting. It's fresh. You know, people don't really have to, I mean, the youth don't really, for us, reference like they don't really they're not serious about, making things have meaning or making sure that things are relevant to the past. They kind of act off the whim. And I think for us, that is what makes youth culture so attractive. And it's something that we can sort of transplant and use in other spaces. So if we went to Soweto, maybe it would be Amapiano, I don't know. But yeah, there's something there just about youth culture and how that's almost universal in the way that, let me just leave it at that. And I hope that answers your question, Marie.
Maybe just to add to that, PH, you said before actually that there's something very territorial about Gqom, the sound specific to Durban's townships, that is really it. So as we were just using that as a lens to understand what youth culture is and how it spatializes itself in the township. So I don't think gospel would have allowed for that or even Maskandi would have allowed that from us. And it's really, it's something that illustrates how enterprising young people in township spaces can be, because it's really just a DIY type of music. You just layer on some sounds, a beat, and then it's really easy and simple to generate. These are people who have taught themselves how to use the technology, the software, in a way that illustrates how enterprising and how these people are really self-starters. So it's also, I had another point which is now just escaping me. But also I think it is difficult actually what we are doing, because for me, Gqom is happening now and has been happening for the past, I don't know, since 2005 for me, in my experience of it, right? So it's something that has happened and is still happening, which makes it difficult to document. It would be easier for us to say, we're trying to understand 90s Kwaito music in South Africa, which, it was a phase that's passed. But I think what's making it more interesting for us to document is that it's happening now and is influencing different types of spaces within the township and across the city. There's most of the famous clubs that play Gqom are in a city of Durban, in Point, where, because Durban is known as the party place of South Africa, it's the playground, all of these things. So those are the things that really influenced our choices. I think, subconsciously even, I don't think we're really conscious that these are the things that were influencing us. But now I think reflecting on it is understanding what Durban is, and that this sound is really specific to the townships of Durban.
Yeah, I think maybe also just to answer Nare's question again. So Nare, this is DJ Lusimani. This is the guy we sort of interviewed. I'm just going to break down this little graph here just to give you guys a bit of background. And this is how his music sort of moves from being in his room all the way to being in town, in very popular hotspots within Durban, right? So he first shares it within his immediate network, for comments, for the people he trusts, to really sort of critique the work he's created. And I think once it's ready, then he sort of takes it to these platforms that we all know, man: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, this and that. And I think once it's there, this is obviously a really broad audience, but then there's very niche communities within this virtual space where you find collectors of the music, and when you put it into this space, I think you're trying to attract certain DJs. So DJs are obviously very instrumental. They're an instrumental link between, obviously moving the music or territorializing the music. Let's just put it that way. So, once these guys, and obviously very popular guys, get wind of your stuff, then you have access to certain places, certain venues, certain spots within the townships, and some places are obviously more popular than others. Some places are more expensive than others, more exclusive. Some places have more of a national footprint, you know, so you want your sound played in different places according to what you want, you know. I guess some people are more deep, you know, they wanna, not deep, but they're sort of anti-pop. So they don't wanna really go for these really popular places, you know. So anyways, there's a whole sort of market and politics around these township sort of venues. Anyways, and then after that, you've got a group of guys who sort of mediate between the township locations or township sort of sound venues and the city venues. And this is where obviously there's a lot of money being spent. You know, it's extremely popular, and you obviously have a very like sort of national sort of footprint. So if you get to play in this sort of zone here, or if your music gets played in this zone, you've kind of made it, you know. But it's sort of controlled by the guys in between here who kind of run the industry there, you know. And this for us obviously now is interesting, because then we sort of then throw characters within this, let's just say, scenario that we've created, and see what kinds of obstacles get in the way of someone trying to make it, you know. So let's just say you're a woman that's trying to, you know, penetrate, you know, what kind of obstacles would you have within this kind of scenario? Yeah, and that's it. That's a basic background. And this is just like one part of it, you know, because there's also like radio, of course, you know, there's also TV, there's all kinds of other avenues that people use. And we've just also just decided to focus it on just the virtual and these very physical spaces through which the sound sort of navigates.